So, 10 minutes to give you an overview of what PAR is actually about. The sort of concepts of things that I'll talk about we'll cover again when Jack and Sarah provide you with some more detailed examples and through the demo and then in the workshop this afternoon. So don't worry about trying to remember all of this stuff straight away. We'll cover it again as we go through the day. So, what is PAR? There are three main things to PAR. The first is that it allows you to describe how to do digital preservation in practice and in enough detail that you can do it for real. And doing it for real might be using a particular preservation tool to fulfill some function, or it might be using a digital preservation system, such as those from Artifacts or Preservica or Archivum. And when we say description, we don't mean something vague like, oh, it's a good thing to do file format identification and use pronom, or if you've got video formats, it's a good idea to migrate them to open specifications. What we mean is describing those sorts of things in enough detail that you can actually do them in practice. So if you want to do file format identification, then use this version of Fido with these parameters, and this is what you'll get from the output, and there is where you find the pronom ID for the file that you put in. Or if you want to convert your video in MP4, then use FFmpeg with these sets of parameters, and that will generate you a Matroska wrapped FFV1 as an open standards version. So we're really trying to get down into the detail of how to do digital preservation in practice and formalize that sort of description. And once you can do that, then you can build up registries of good practice. So it might be within your own institution describing how you're going to implement your preservation policies through specific preservation actions. It might be JISC through their Open Research Hub building a registry of preservation practice for research data. It might be a community that specializes in different types of content like audiovisual. Or it might be within a digital preservation system, its own registry of how it does digital preservation. And if you can have a description of how to do digital preservation, and you can have registries where you put those descriptions, that good practice, then you can start sharing it. So you can start exchanging this sort of information between digital preservation systems using APIs or protocols. And that's the third part of PAR. So these are the things that we're trying to do. Why? I mean, I think we've covered that to a certain extent already. There is good practice out there, but it can be hard to find and use, especially within digital preservation systems. So we're trying to break down that problem. Where did PAR come from? JISC, we've heard that already. So what can you really describe in PAR? So if you want a more formal model, then you can go and look at our iPres paper. But in practice, it's a simple set of concepts. So you have a preservation action, which is something you do. An action has a type, and we use premise for the types. So it might be fixity checking or migration or characterization. An action is something you do on an input digital object or file. You may have some properties as input, so you can only perform this migration action on video file formats. You do this action using a tool, so a piece of software, for example, and that tool needs to be configured to behave in a particular way, and that tool may then create new files or objects for you, or it may extract information like information on your video files or checksums or other characteristics. And which tools you use to perform which actions to produce what results. All that context of why and how you would do that is then captured in business rules. So that's the core concepts of PAR. And it really centers around preservation actions and business rules. And here's some simple examples of preservation actions. Checking checksums, file format conversion, extracting properties from a file. And that seems reasonably simple. But of course, you can do preservation actions on much more complex types of digital content. And that may require a whole series of tools and steps. And we're kind of doing the simple stuff first, looking at how to deal with preservation of files, but the whole PAR model that we're trying to develop, we're aiming it to be flexible enough to solve the more complicated digital preservation problems later on. Some quick examples: property extraction. So you might use media info to extract properties of video files. And here you can have the same tool, media info, and the same input file, but depending on how you configure it, it would generate different descriptions of those properties. So this is why we have this model in PAR of separating out actions from tools, from configuration on parameters and what properties produce, because these things are all connected together. Checksum tools, you can use the same tool both to generate checksums and check checksums. So the same tool has different purposes, so we need to be able to describe that. File format identification, there are lots of different tools that fulfill the same purpose, but they produce slightly different results. And you need to know, well, which tools are you going to use and when, and which ones are better than others in different contexts. We try and capture that sort of thing through things like business rules. So that hopefully gives you a flavor of what PAR is about, some of the main concepts and why those concepts are important. And we'll cover those again as we go through the rest of the day. And where we are currently, we've got the concepts defined, at least a starting point, and no doubt they will evolve. We have our conceptual model. We have machine-readable versions of all of this, and this is really important for exchanging information between registries and preservation systems. We have an API that enables that exchange to take place. We're looking at how we can make these preservation actions describable in enough detail that can be executed in practice. And as you'll see from the demo, we've already got a proof of concept, which is something that Sarah and Jack will share or show you in a minute.